We have Mr. Adam Levy on the podcast. He's the managing partner at Ikon Search, a very big staffing and recruiting firm that specializes in marketing, paid media, product, and data analytic roles. So, welcome on. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, David. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So, how did you get into all this? Where did your career start, and why did you pick this industry?
So it's my story goes back from when I was little, I guess. My dad happened to have a big staffing company, and well, it wasn't big to begin with. He started it probably in the late 1970s, and when things were a lot different back then.
Mhm.
And he was able to grow it, and I remember him taking me to the office when he maybe only had 15 people, and going through the mail back then. All the checks came in the mail, and we'd go in on Saturdays, and that was kind of like my day with him. My parents were got divorced when I was much younger, so that was Saturdays were my day with my dad, and he'd take me into the office, and I was always kind of enamored by how he was able to build over the years, this big operation, and eventually he got it to 20 plus offices up and down the East Coast and 200 plus people, and I just over the years kind of watched him grow it, and saw him working hard, and I was always just taken by it, and it was always interesting to me.
Yeah. And what positions did he recruit for? Because I know that's super big that people kind of niche down in that industry to certain positions.
Yeah, so back then, in this when he started in the 70s and 80s, it was a bit of a free for all. It was kind of like, you know, fill whatever you can. But his niche, I guess you can call it, was always in office support. So it was, he always did a lot of executive assistants, personal assistants, office managers, HR professionals. And then as the company grew, he opened up a legal division. He opened up a Japanese was very big then. So he opened up a bilingual Japanese division. He opened up a light industrial division throughout Jersey and throughout the Carolinas. He opened up I think a PR and fashion division. So he as the company grew, he started opening up different divisions, but it was always primarily office support focused.
Yeah. And how different is the process for the different positions that you recruit for? So I know, like in your company, you do more towards marketing and stuff like that. But if you were to
Yeah.
build out a position for or a department for like medical staffing, let's say, how different is that process in those two different niches?
Yeah, so medical is a good one to throw out there because that is a very different beast than any other sector you can go into. My first company that I started back in 2003 was predominantly medical contract business. We also grew it, to other divisions, but we started out doing medical. Um, Medical is just really difficult because of all the credentialing. If you do a clinical position in medical, you have to have, your shots and your diploma. Nursing is, a very specialized field, and people don't just want any person, coming in, taking your blood. So the medical field is quite different than any other field. With the other sectors, we have a few divisions now at Icon. We have risk and compliance, we have tech, we have PR and communications. It's all fairly similar. The process is still the same. Just the jobs are different, and the people who run those divisions for me, their expertise is different, obviously.
Yeah. And so how do you pick which niche that you should go into? Let's say someone who's looking into build a staffing and recruiting firm, or for yourself, like how did you choose which positions you should go for and recruit for in the beginning?
Yeah. So for me, I still run the digital media and marketing division because I have a degree in marketing. I was just always personally interested in marketing. That was just a personal um, uh, pursuit that I always enjoyed. So that's why I went into marketing. But we look for, as we grow the company, we look for the talent first. So if someone came on who was super talented and they had 10, 15 years of recruitment experience and a big book of business, and they were skilled at placing, like you said, maybe medical professionals, we'd maybe look to build around, a new division around that person. So we don't really have a focus where we're going to say, hey, this is the sector that we're going after. We like to find the talent first, as I'm sure a lot of other companies do, and then build around that.
Yeah. And that idea of the book of business. So like how important in that industry is your network and who you know and like your access to different companies and whatnot? Like how crucial is having a good network for what you do?
Yeah. So in our business, it's pretty crucial. you can get by if you work for a big company. There's, massive publicly traded staffing companies out there, where you can join a team and you're, on a team of 40, 50 people. And you can get by on that managing director's business. But if you want to go to a smaller boutique staffing firm like us, you probably need, or not probably, you do need, a good book of business, some clients to call on day one and say, hey, I'm over here now. Um,
Mhm.
I'd like to continue working with you. So there's two routes to go. You can always go the big, publicly traded staffing firm route, or you can go the
Mhm.
boutique route.
Yeah. And for Icon, what would you say your goals are? Maybe like short term, we could talk about, we could say that as a couple months from now, and then Icon for a couple years would be more long term. So what would you say your goals for the company are? And even just for your own career, just out of curiosity.
Yeah. So the first staffing company I started in 2003. I grew it to about 30 people, and we had a few regional offices. So it was a nice size back then. The second time around, usually things are a little easier, although in this market, it's proving not easier, maybe a little even tougher. Um, but look, I'd like to think I could, triple or quadruple, the size of it, the first time. But you never know. We take our business very, very day to day. We try to make very strategic, thought out decisions on, on how we grow and the divisions we want to get into. Um, so there's no real like firm, 5-year plan or 2-year plan, but it's always fun to sort of grow it out and see where you can take it. And sometimes, things come your way that you're not expecting. So we kind of run with that when that happens.
Yeah, I always like to ask that question because I know when I ask about like long-term career goals, everyone has such different answers. So just a question I always want to throw out there.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Long term, it's fun to think about, but it's really difficult to to say, hey, in 5 years we want to be this. I thought when I launched Icon that I'd be just a digital media and marketing focused recruitment firm, and that's what I thought I'd build out. The plans changed very quickly after we met a few other people who wanted to open up divisions for us, and all of a sudden our company looks very much different than what I thought it would look like when I launched it. So it's always you know, tough to say, hey, this is what it will be. You have to be
y-
pretty nimble.
yeah, and I'm starting to realize in business, I feel like the next step that you should take gets shown to you as you start walking down the path. Like the company always changes. Like I was hearing this interview with Elon Musk, and he was saying that he never had a business plan because they're always inaccurate. Because month one into building the business versus month 10, it's always different from what you anticipate. Would you kind of agree with that statement?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, there's a million examples of people who have gone into it. Even clients of mine, have said, "Hey, we started off as this, and then we turned into we realized, that we had a SaaS solution that we could spin off and start selling, and that division really took off, and we scrapped our original business." I mean, I hear that so much, from my clients that they take a totally different turn than when they started out at where they
Yeah.
started. Yeah.
Yeah, and this company, Icon, in comparison to the other companies you've worked for or built, what are some of the key lessons I guess you've learned across your career? And I'm sure this could take up a whole podcast, but
Yeah.
what are some of the key lessons you've learned that you think other people who maybe are in your industry or not should have, and what are some good skills to have?
Yeah, I mean, it's back to what we just spoke about, a minute ago. Is really being able to go with the flow and be nimble. I thought I'll give you one example. When my dad had his company, I thought, I'd graduate college, I'd immediately go work for him and I'd take it over one day. He didn't let me work for him for the first 2 years, which is fine. Good, good lesson for me. I enjoyed that. And then I only got to work for him for 1 year, and he sold the whole thing. So my plan that I had completely was lost
Mhm.
because my dad had a different plan. So now I had to pivot, right, and figure out what I was going to do next. But that lesson, was really valuable, and it sort of stays with me today, right? Like I said, I thought Icon was going to be a marketing firm, and it turned out not to be. Marketing really took a hit and slowed down in 23 and end of 22.
Mhm.
So we're lucky we had these other divisions, but you really just have to be nimble and be willing to sort of, take some punches and figure out how you're going to counterpunch, so to speak.
Yeah. And so also I remember we were talking about in our other call, you were in Miami for a bit. I think I see you were working for like the Real Real. So what were you doing with with the Real Real, and then also what brought you to Miami?
Yeah, so I it was actually the real deal, the real
Oh, the
estate
real deal. Yeah.
the real deal, yeah, the business publication. Yep.
Misread that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no worries. So I had taken an exit from my company. I had built it up and ran it for 7, 8 years and took an exit. I wanted to work for, because at that point I had only worked for very small companies and for my own company. So I wanted to work for the biggest company I could find. And I had a connection at a very large building products import and distribution company, an international billion-dollar company. And even though I didn't love the sector, I said, wow, let me work for a billion-dollar international company, see what it's like, see how they're run, see what, what processes they have, so, just learn from them. And I started working for them in, I think, 2010. They moved me up the ladder pretty quickly. They moved me to Arizona to run the office out there for a year, and then they moved me to Miami to run two sales teams, a domestic team and an international team for them. And that's what brought me down to Miami. Um, I did that for them, I think, for 5 or 6 years. And then I didn't like the sector. I had learned everything I could. And I wanted to stay in Miami. And then I found the real deal. And I was always, like I said, interested in media. So I was like, okay, let me work for a media company for a little bit. And I did that for a while. And then after being in Miami for 4 years, then, the knock came that I needed to get back to New York.
Yeah.
And that's when I moved back.
Yeah. What is it like working for a billion-dollar company versus having your own firm and starting up from the ground? What would you say are some of the key differences? And should everyone really have that experience, even if you want to build your own business, to go work at these billion-dollar firms to see how they operate? So just interested in the differences between that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, when you work for a billion-dollar company, the personnel and the systems in place, are pretty sound. There's a million different systems and logins for everything, for your 401k, for your benefit, there's all types of systems that you have to write down. I had a million passwords when I worked there.
Yeah.
Um, but I think it was interesting at how they organize their business. It was interesting how they roll out new products. It was interesting how they, track their inventory, how they book sales, how they mark up their items, how they book a loss. You could just learn so much from these big companies. I was fortunate enough when I was there, they rolled out a massive SAP implementation. It was a massive ERP software solution. So I think that cost them like 20 million to implement. So just seeing how a $20 million piece of software is implemented into
Mhm.
a company that had, 40, 50 locations across the US. Um, it was I just always found that interesting. I mean, some of those things are so big and so expensive that I could never implement them at Icon, right? I'm not
Mhm.
paying, you know, $20 million, $1 million, let alone $20 million for a
Yeah.
software system. Yeah, maybe one day I am, but
Mm.
not in the foreseeable future. But learning about those things and seeing how their hierarchy works and seeing how people get promoted, um, it was just interesting to me. Do you need that experience? Not necessarily. Um, but I find myself always taking bits and pieces from that company, from other companies I worked for in the past, and sort of making it my own, which is kind of the fun part of building a company.
Yeah, I asked a similar question a couple podcasts ago, and it was a similar answer where when you work for these huge companies, you really see the organization and the hierarchy and whatnot. And I think when you're building your own company from the ground up, like it tends to lack organization, just from compare, especially compared to these companies that have been around for 100 plus years. So, how important would you
Yeah.
say focusing on the organizations and the systems you actually have in the companies you're building are? Like, how important is that?
Yeah, it's important, but you have to pick and choose, right? You can't have 20 systems from day one, that'll put you, too deep in the red. You have to have your basic, payroll system so people can log in, see their paycheck, maybe a 401k. People have to, you have to have some benefits. And then as you grow, you start to add, more and more things, to your company that become advantageous for employees. Um, we're at a great time right now where there's a SaaS solution for everything. Um, when I had my first company, I just remember like, getting the phone bill like in the mail, mailed to me. I remember I had to have a receptionist at the front. There's just so many differences now building the company the second time around that I didn't have, just expenses that, that are not needed, that are just not there anymore. and SaaS solutions that make my life a lot easier.
Yeah. And in terms of the job market in general, how is the job market looking now? Because I see it in the headlines all the time, because and you would know more about this than me. It seems like it's tough out there. People aren't landing as many jobs. I always hear AI is coming to take 80 million jobs or whatnot. And so is the job market kind of suffering now? And then what would you expect that it's going to look like in the next couple of years?
Yeah, it's a little bit soft now, and it's not as robust as it was, back 2 or 3 years ago, right? We came out of COVID pretty strong in 21 and 22, even a little bit in 23, but 23 really started to slow down. Um, we are a little bit lucky in terms of we do very specialized roles, so and we have some divisions that are a bit recession proof. Risk and compliance is, for these big financial firms is a necessity. They can't just have, no one manning their compliance department. So we have a few divisions. That insurance too. Insurance seems to be a fairly hot sector right now. You own a home, it's mandated that you have flood and housing insurance, and all the other insurances. You own a car, or lease a car, you have to have auto insurance. So the insurance industry is fairly recession proof, and that's doing well. Marketing, my division is down. People see that as not a must have. So when times are good, marketing departments are building and growing. When times are good, maybe it's more of a skeleton marketing staff. Um, but we slowly see it coming around each month. In
Mhm.
24, things have picked up each and every month, which is nice to see. Um, there are some pockets though where it's slow, right? July and August typically slow for us. But come third, end of third and beginning of fourth quarter, we see a big tick up, big uptick usually.
Okay. Yeah, that'd be good. And I definitely, it's interesting how certain industries are recession proof. Like, no matter what, you're going to need insurance. No matter what,
Yeah,
risk and compliance is probably something you can't throw out the window for any company. But it's
right.
interesting how, in the mind of like a company, certain departments are they're the first to go in a sense, or like they're the first to have less priority, I would say, in terms of how they allocate the capital. And it's just interesting to see. But
Yeah.
along along the way, would you say, and I feel like you're going to say your dad is one of them, but would you say you had any mentors along the way, and what did they teach you?
Yeah. Yes, back to my dad is, he wasn't the greatest teacher, in the world, but I just always saw him, back in the day, you'd have to wear a full suit, going to work. And I always saw him, putting on a suit, and he had one of these massive briefcases that was like about to explode. And I just always thought that was interesting. And I always thought it was kind of cool that he was, like working so hard and, trying to build this operation and he was always sweating through his suit, and it just like it's I was just always like taken by that, and always sort of looked up to that, like, hey, this guy's working really hard, and he's able to build something, and that was cool to me to see.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. And it's also it's interesting because I feel like in asking what do they teach you, there's also some lessons that it's not like they directly instructed you through this, but I think just you seeing him go to work is a teaching moment in and of itself. So it,
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, just seeing some, and I always think about it now. It's like times are so different now, right? My son, he's young, he's only 9 months, so he can't really process it. But, he may see me not wearing a suit, wearing a short sleeve polo shirt, taking a call. Like, will he really think that I feel I'm working just as hard as my dad did. But because of how things are perceived, I'm maybe taking a call while I'm picking up breakfast, or, things are different now. Will he really see me working as, or perceive that I'm working, super hard? Or will he think, well, Adam just goes out and takes a call here and there, and pulls out his laptop and doesn't have a 40-pound briefcase. So so it's interesting how things evolve.
it's also interesting because I feel like the standard of like what is working at an office is changing so rapidly where I guess when my dad was working when he was 30, it was wear a suit, as you said, go to work. You have to take, the train or the car if you're in New York, and you go to the office and you actually sit there and do work. Now it's like you wear a polo, you go on Zoom, it's remote work. So do you think that this trend of remote work being a huge part of every company is going to continue, or do you think companies want their employees to come back? And so what have you seen in the staffing recruiting market?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think a lot of companies are got comfortable with the remote work, um, and I think they're okay with it. The problem comes in where, especially in New York, and this may not happen in other cities, but owners of companies pay such high monthly fees for their rent. If they're
Mhm.
leasing a 40,000, 50,000 square foot office, that could cost them, I don't know, but a lot. They feel, well, hey, I'm spending 50, 100, 200 grand a month to have this office. If people come in 2 days a week, why am I spending this money to even have this office?
Mhm.
So it puts owners of companies in a bit of a tough spot because they want their employees to be happy. But maybe they say to themselves, okay, if people are only coming in 1, 2 days a week, maybe I can just get rid of this whole expense and let everyone work remote. Um, Maybe that would make some people happy, but I have people who work for me who love coming in.
Mhm.
We have a policy where you only need to go in 3 days a week, but it's a loose policy. But I have guys who come in 5 days because they just like getting out and working with the team.
Yeah. It's yeah.
So it's hard to please everyone, but I think there'll be some form of remote work. At least forward-thinking companies will say, hey, you can pick 1 or 2 days where you can work remote, and I think that'll be here to stay.
Yeah, what I think is interesting is that I can see why it's up to preference, right? There's going to be people who actually get a lot of work done at home doing remote work, and there's going to be people who actually want to be in the office and be there to have the experience. I wonder in a couple of years when they come out with more studies about actual levels of productivity, if being at home is equally or more as productive than going into the office. Because I would just imagine that sitting at home doing work all day, even if it's remote, even if your company allows it, I would just not be as productive. So it's difficult for me to imagine.
Yeah, 100%. And I'm sure you have a lot of younger, skewed viewers, right? I always think when you're graduating school and you're, coming into the workforce, get into the office, listen in on conversations. You just don't learn as much over Zoom. I listened in on so many conversations of, people that were older than me, people that were skilled at this. And you just pick up so much just by being there. And you have great relationships, you meet people. Some people meet their significant other at the office. A lot of people do, or meet, or meet, of, friends that they've had for 20 years. Hard to do that when you're just doing Zoom.
Yeah, that's a whole other topic about one of the biggest detriments I see with remote work, and you could definitely touch on this more than I can. It's not in the fact of like one dimensional, I can do this assignment or this task actually dealt to me, but it's the all the other parts about the job of actually networking with other people, having these side conversations. I remember when I was working at Fisher Investments, like just talking with someone at the coffee machine, in between tasks and whatnot. Like you don't get any of that when you're home. Yes, maybe you're doing the tasks on a one dimensional level, but you're not having all the other stuff that comes with it. So.
Yeah, of course. And then sometimes, maybe your boss says to you, hey, let's that was a tough situation this afternoon. Let's get a drink. Let's discuss it. Those meetings after work where you're grabbing a drink or, or whatever it is, you get so much information when you're off site and not on, on the work, on the work site. Um, those are valuable, those are just valuable times for people as they're building a career.
Yeah. And how much of your success would you attribute to having the basketball record at Virtual Athletics for scoring those 35 points?
That was a game that I will always remember. Um, Funny enough, in that game, we lost the game by 2 points.
Oh, wow.
Um, yeah, so I'll always remember that part. So I guess I didn't quite score enough in that game, but yeah, I mean, I always like, I always like hiring people who are either former athletes or in one form or another. It's a good competitive spirit. It builds teamwork. It's so many things that it helps shape who you are. So it's a good background to have, and I enjoy talking about it with people.
Yeah, on a serious note, I definitely see a trend, and I've talked to other recruiters where they see this as well, where it does just say something about someone when they were a varsity athlete or especially like a captain of a team. Those leadership skills definitely do translate to the workplace. And have you seen that across the people that you've met or recruited for or hired or whatnot?
Yeah, for sure. I think sports is a good training ground, for being successful. I think working as a bartender or a server in a restaurant, restaurant workers, That's super good training. You're on your feet. You have to juggle a million different tasks. Um, Military is another good one. People in the military are usually very disciplined, very, very focused. So I find there's a bunch of different, it's not just sports. I find there's a bunch of different backgrounds that you can have where, it suits you well and going into the corporate America.
Yeah, it's so fascinating because I was actually having a conversation with a recruiter from Gartner, and she was saying the exact same thing where, some people who don't land, let's say in banking, that finance internship they wanted, and they think, oh, my summer's over, I have nothing to do. But if you actually were to get a job as you said, like a bartender at a restaurant, those soft skills that you learn and the communication skills are so important. They translate to everything. And so people should really be considering those other jobs you can hold because the soft skills are also a super important thing to learn. And you really learn that when you're doing these jobs like at a restaurant or as a bartender or in the military, as you said.
Yeah.
Another interesting thing to take note of.
Yeah. And sometimes, look, you never know when you're going to meet someone, right? You're a server in a high-end restaurant, someone, and you do a superb job for someone. Maybe there's a CEO that you're serving that you don't even know who could offer you an internship or your first role out of school. So you never know who you can meet doing
Yeah,
your, yeah,
I've definitely met hundreds of people playing basketball, and so
yeah,
you never realize where it is or where you actually meet the people, and so and the person you might be playing basketball with might be the recruiter for the company you want to work for, and so always be vigilant for
100%.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
And on a separate note, how important would you say company culture is? I think I talk about this in every single podcast because I think it's more interesting that people think about, especially at my age. I don't think people are looking at companies to work for after college. They're looking at the actual culture of when they get into the job. What does that look like? Do they enjoy like being with their coworkers or whatnot? And so, how important is company culture? And then, how do you kind of infuse that and like that sort of fit when you're looking to hire or recruit candidates and work with clients and whatnot?
Yeah, so that's interesting. There's a bit of a debate on this. I don't know if you've heard this on company culture. You know, some people think it's very important to set the culture and have a strong company culture. Other people say, well, if you set the company culture, does that really just mean you're hiring people that are just like you and you're not really branching out because you're trying to find people that fit your culture? Maybe that's not necessarily a good thing. Maybe you should have people that don't quite fit the culture and become more diverse. So there's two schools of thought on that. For us, we have a very trusting culture. We have unlimited PTO. We have you could work from home a couple days a week, but that's just sort of the operation that I'm looking to build. I don't want to have to micromanage. I don't want to have to do all those things that maybe I was okay with 10 or 15 years ago. At this point in my career, I just don't want to do that. So our culture is really, trusting. I think it's important that people know that. I think it's important that people get to feel like an adult. If you're sick, you don't have to ask, if you could take off, you just tell me, I'm sick.
Yeah.
Here's what I'm doing. So I kind of like that. I like, having people feel responsible for themselves and not having to check in or maybe check in isn't the right word, but having to feel they're obliged to conform to certain policies.
Yeah. And would you say that you've seen, maybe it's a biased question, but a more effective way to manage, like maybe not micromanaging your team has worked better in the companies that you've seen, in all the companies you've been at? Or is it really just you've seen it work on all ends and it's just depending on the actual people that you're working with? So is there really an effective or a more effective way to manage people?
Yeah, I mean, you have to manage everyone a little bit differently, as I'm sure you can guess. I mean, it's uh it's funny, people that are doing their job and doing it well uh, usually need very little management. And those are the types of people I like to hire. The
Mhm.
people who come in, know how to do their job, know how to do it well. Maybe they do a check-in call with me once a week. Maybe it's a quick meeting, on Friday. So that's what I like. It's the people that I have to talk to, 3 times a day, every day. And again, that it's fine. I don't mind it, but I prefer the more hands-off approach where I only have to step in when there's an issue or a problem.
Yeah, I was hearing about that exact thing on a podcast where this CEO was talking about, I can't remember, but he was talking about how the most skilled people you can hire are the people you're like, go build this division, a super
Yeah.
complex task, and it just gets done. You don't have to manage them the entire way through,
Mm.
and you could just trust that they'll do it. But if you hire, we'll say like a less skilled hire, and you actually have to guide them through every single step because they've never done that before. So
Yeah.
just something I was hearing about.
Yeah, and I like people to give me the plan. I don't, when we're building these divisions, I want them coming to me and saying, all right, here's what's going on. I have 15 job openings. I'm swamped. I can't handle them. I really need to hire two more people to handle this. We're bringing in two more clients. I want them to come to me with the issue and what their solution is. And then we'll sit down and we'll talk about it and figure out what the best path forward is.
Yeah.
Um,
No, 100%. So what would I feel like we've covered a lot of good ground and I've definitely learned a lot from the podcast and I'm sure everyone else will as well. And so what are some key lessons that we could boil down from the conversation today or maybe something we missed that the audience should know about, you know, we'll say finding jobs and internships because I think a lot of the people that I know or will be listening to this are really looking at it from a career development perspective.
yeah.
And there's going to be people who want to hear from you about how to actually go out there and land a job because you're the one recruiting for these jobs. And also there might be people who are interested in actually getting into staffing recruiting as like a full-time job. So to both of those camps, what would you say is some good advice for them?
Yeah, the first thing is when you're trying to land a job, it's a full-time job trying to land a job. You have to be willing to reach out to anyone and everyone who is remotely interesting to you. If your parents, best friend's neighbor, works at a company that you find cool, you have to be willing to ask for that introduction. You have to obviously use LinkedIn like crazy. But I think you'll have the most success when you use your personal connections and you're genuinely inquisitive, right? People want to help people graduating from college. If I get a call from someone who's recently graduated and they want to chat, I'm always happy to chat with them and tell them about the marketing, the digital media sector and what's going on. Can I always help them get the job? No, but I can inform them. I can maybe make an introduction or two. So you just have to be willing to, get out there, talk to people. It doesn't matter if you want to work at that company. Talk to them, see what's going on at that company, have a few thoughtful questions, ask them questions, and just learn. Okay, I thought I'd want to work there. Now hearing that, maybe I don't. Or I never thought in a million years I'd want to work here. Now I just talked to one of the VPs. That job sounds amazing. So it's really tough to say, where you're going to find success. But a thing I like to tell people is do what, if you want to have like some early success in finding a role, do one thing a day so that it makes you feel good, right? If it's reaching out to, an old neighbor who's a VP at a company, that's your one thing. If it's emailing 10 people on LinkedIn who you found interesting, that's your one thing. But at least accomplish one thing. So you could say, okay, this was my goal today. This is what I accomplished. Tomorrow's another day. I'll do the next thing for tomorrow.
Yeah.
In terms of staffing and getting into the recruitment business, if people want to get into that business, number one, they should email me. That's the first thing. Um,
Yeah.
Number two, I think it's important. I think it's always good to work at a big company, a big staffing company. Learn the ropes from these guys. There's companies out there with 10,000, 20,000 employees, that really, do this well and staff for massive, they have contracts with companies like Microsoft and Tesla and Apple. And, those are companies that I can't land. But it's interesting to get a start for a huge staffing company and work on the Microsoft account or work on another big account. And learn the ropes from people who have been there for a long time. And then you could possibly like it and climb the ladder there, which is always fun. Or you could maybe come to a smaller boutique company like me and, see what that's all about.